Picture yourself treading water in the open ocean. Nothing between you and 6 tons of black and white muscle gliding past 20 feet away. It has a bite force that can shatter bone like dry wood. It can flip a great white shark on its back and hold it there until the shark drowns. Marine biologists have watched it work in teams precise enough to take down the largest animal that has ever lived on Earth. Bigger than any dinosaur, bigger than anything that has ever swum, walked, or flown. Now consider this. Across more than a century of recorded encounters between this animal and defenseless swimmers, sailors, and divers, there is exactly one confirmed case of it seriously injuring a human being in the wild. Not one confirmed kill, ever. That's not an animal that can't reach us. It's an animal that has decided over and over again not to. And once you understand why, the ocean is going to look very different to you. Start with what we even call it, because the name itself is a mistake nobody ever corrected. Basque and Spanish whalers, watching pods of these animals work together to bring down whales many times their size, coined a phrase that translated roughly to whale killer. When that phrase crossed into English centuries later, the words got flipped, and whale killer quietly became killer whale, turning an animal that hunts whales into an animal whose entire identity is built around the word kill. It isn't even a whale, technically. It's the single largest member of the dolphin family alive today. Its scientific name, Orcanus orca, borrows from Orcas, the Roman god of the underworld, a title that, once you see what this animal can do, doesn't feel like an exaggeration. An adult male stretches close to 32 feet and can weigh 22,000 pounds, about the mass of a city bus, moving through water at speeds that outpace most boats. Its conical teeth, each roughly 4 inches long, interlock like the teeth of a bear trap. None of that, though, is actually the scariest part of this animal. The scariest part is what it's capable of when it decides to use a weakness against its prey instead of brute force. For years, marine biologists in South Africa were baffled by great white shark carcasses washing up on shore, fully intact except for one detail. Their livers were gone. Eventually, they found the culprit. Orcas had discovered that flipping a shark upside down triggers something called tonic immobility, a total paralysis response the shark cannot fight or override. Paralyzed and unable to force water over its gills, the shark suffocates while it's still conscious. The orca then opens the abdomen and removes only the liver, the single most calorie-dense organ on the animal, worth more in energy than the rest of the shark combined. The fear this creates runs so deep that great white sharks have been recorded abandoning entire feeding grounds off the South African coast for months at a time, the instant orcas are detected nearby. 2 male orcas off the Western Cape, nicknamed Port and Starboard for their distinctive bent dorsal fins, have become infamous for exactly this. Marine biologists have tied them to more than a dozen liver-stripped shark carcasses washing ashore near Gansby since 2017, each with the same near-surgical precision. And a shark isn't even close to the ceiling of what this animal will take on. In March 2019, off Bremer Bay in Western Australia, researchers filmed something that had only ever existed as a theory before that point. A pod of roughly a dozen orcas coordinating to bring down a full-grown adult blue whale, the largest creature to ever exist on this planet, the first such kill ever scientifically documented. They organize the attack like a military operation. Some individuals take turns pressing against the whale's blowhole to cut off its air, while others tear at the tongue and flank, systematically exhausting an animal many times their individual size until it can no longer fight back. The same population struck again just over 2 weeks later, killing a calf, and returned in 2021 to take down a juvenile, a coordinated hunting party, in every case smaller than most human sports teams, dismantling the biggest animal biology has ever produced. So why does an animal capable of all of that sit at 0 confirmed human kills in the wild? The answer starts inside its skull. An adult orca's brain weighs somewhere around 5 times what yours does. Not just larger in raw mass, but dense with a specific structure called spindle neurons. the same cell type responsible for empathy, intuition, and grief in the human brain. Orcas are among a small handful of species on Earth, alongside humans, great apes, and elephants, that pass the mirror self-recognition test, the standard scientific benchmark for self-awareness. In its first weeks of life, a calf learns a unique vocal signature that functions almost like a name, one it will use for the rest of its life to identify itself to every other orca within listening range. That brain power comes at a strange cost. Because breathing is a conscious act for an orca rather than an automatic reflex, it can never afford to lose consciousness completely. A deep, human-style sleep would mean forgetting to surface and drowning. Instead, orcas rest one hemisphere of the brain at a time, closing only the eye on the opposite side, while the other half stays alert enough to keep breathing, track the pod, and watch for danger, alternating sides until both halves eventually get their rest. Newborn calves and their mothers appear to skip sleep almost entirely for the first month of life, staying in near constant motion until the calf is strong enough to rest safely. In a very real sense, an orca is never fully unconscious a single day of its life. That intelligence didn't just produce smarter hunting. It produced something that looks, on close inspection, a lot like culture. In the waters of the Pacific Northwest, there are two distinct populations of orcas occupying the exact same territory: resident pods that eat only fish, and transient pods that hunt seals, sea lions, and other marine mammals almost exclusively. These two groups never interbreed, never socialize, and communicate using entirely different vocal dialects. Dialects so distinct that a resident orca listening to a transient pod is functionally listening to a foreign language it cannot parse. None of that separation is written into their genes. It is taught generation after generation, the same way human culture passes from parent to child. That same structure decides who actually runs the pod. Orca society is matriarchal, and the oldest females typically stop reproducing decades before they die. Orcas are one of only a small handful of species on Earth, alongside humans, known to go through anything resembling menopause. Those grandmothers don't fade into the background once their reproductive years end. Research on resident pods in the Pacific Northwest has found that post-reproductive females lead their families to foraging grounds, especially in lean years when salmon are scarce, and disproportionately share their catch with their adult sons. When one of these grandmothers dies, her son's risk of death rises sharply in the years that follow. Decades of accumulated knowledge, it turns out, are worth more to the group than one more calf. That teaching gets extreme in places. Off the coast of Argentina's Valdez Peninsula, orcas have learned to intentionally strand themselves on open beaches to snatch sea lion pups playing at the water's edge, then use raw muscle to drag themselves back into the surf. A maneuver risky enough that a single miscalculated angle can leave the animal stranded and dying on the sand, which is exactly why mothers spend years drilling the technique into their young in shallow, low-risk practice runs before ever letting them attempt it for real. In the frozen waters of Antarctica, other pods have learned to hunt seals resting on floating ice by swimming in tight formation to generate a single coordinated wave that washes the seal directly off the ice and into open water. And in the Bering Sea, some populations have learned to recognize the specific mechanical whine of a fishing vessel's hydraulic winch from more than a kilometer away, racing in to strip an entire catch off the line before the crew can react. This is not an animal running on raw instinct. This is a society with regional customs, generational teaching, and a body of learned knowledge that no individual orca could have arrived at alone. And in the summer of 2018, that society showed the entire world exactly how deep its emotional life runs. A southern resident orca, known to researchers as J35, nicknamed Tahlequah, gave birth to a female calf off the coast of Victoria, British Columbia. The calf lived for roughly 30 minutes before she died. Tahlequah would not let her go. She pushed her daughter's body to the surface using her own head, and every time the small body slipped beneath the waterline, she dove down to retrieve it and push it back up again. She repeated this for 17 consecutive days, across more than 1,000 miles of open ocean, refusing to feed for much of that time, as researchers tracking her grew increasingly afraid the effort would kill her too. Other members of her pod took turns swimming close beside her, occasionally supporting the calf's weight when Tahlequah was too exhausted to continue alone. Marine biologists who have devoted entire careers to this species called it the longest documented act of grief ever recorded in a wild animal. The images circled the globe within days. People who had never once thought seriously about an orca found themselves crying over a photograph of a mother who simply would not put her child down. This is the same animal that has never taken a human life in the wild, not because it lacks the power. Here, finally, is the answer to the paradox this video opened with. Orcas hunt largely by echolocation, firing off rapid clicks of sound and reading the return signal bouncing back off anything nearby. That returning signal doesn't just tell an orca where something is, it tells the orca what it's made of: fat content, bone density, rough size, and shape. When those sound waves bounce off a human body, what comes back reads nothing like a seal, a sea lion, or anything else on an orca's usual menu. A completely different fat layer, a completely different skeletal signature. In clear water, an orca isn't guessing what you are. Its own biological sonar is already telling it, with total certainty, that you don't belong on the list. The one place that system breaks down is churning, bubble-saturated surf, where sound scatters unpredictably and echolocation effectively goes blind. That's precisely the situation on September 9th, 1972, off Point Sur, California, when a surfer named Hans Kretschmer was in the water near a group of sea lions and felt something clamp down on his leg with tremendous force. He fought back, striking the animal repeatedly, and it released him almost immediately and vanished, never attempting a second pass. The wound required around 100 stitches, and to this day, it remains the only well-documented case of a wild orca seriously injuring a human being. Nearly every researcher who has studied the case points to the same explanation: a rare visual misjudgment in bad conditions, corrected the instant it was discovered. If humans really are permanently off the menu, though, how do you explain what has been happening off the coast of Spain and Portugal since 2020? A small, critically endangered subpopulation of orcas in the Strait of Gibraltar began repeatedly ramming sailboats, snapping their rudders clean off. It has now happened in more than 500 documented interactions, and a handful of vessels have gone down entirely, forcing rescues at sea. International headlines reached for words like revenge and uprising. Researchers studying the behavior point to something far less dramatic and far more interesting. In every recorded case, once a boat is disabled or sinking and the people on board end up in the water, the orcas leave. They were never interested in the humans. The rudder, and only the rudder, is the target. In behavior, some scientists trace back to a single individual, an orca researchers nicknamed White Gladys, whose habit may have spread to others in her small, tightly bonded population, the same way a trend spreads through a group of teenagers, similar to how orcas elsewhere have been observed passing down purely recreational habits, like draping kelp over their bodies for reasons that have nothing to do with survival. A 2022 study identified roughly 15 individuals out of a subpopulation of about 35 as the ones actually involved in the ramming behavior, a small, tightly related cluster within an already critically endangered population, exactly the kind of setting where one learned habit can spread fast among relatives and stick for years. Which makes what happened to one specific orca almost impossible to look away from. His name was Tahlequah. He was captured off the coast of Iceland in 1983 at roughly 2 years old, torn from his mother and his pod, and spent the next 3 decades in a series of marine parks. For years, he was housed overnight with aggressive tank mates in a module barely 20 feet across, locked in for more than 14 hours at a stretch to keep the animals from tearing into each other in the dark. Over those 34 years in captivity, Tahlequah was connected to the deaths of 3 separate people, including Don Brancho, an experienced trainer he pulled underwater in front of a live audience in 2010. Every wild orca on record, faced with a human within striking distance, has shown the opposite instinct: recognition, restraint, release. What happened with Tahlequah wasn't that instinct reversing itself. It was that instinct being systematically dismantled over 3 decades by conditions that would fracture the psychology of almost any intelligent, socially bonded animal. Stripped of a family structure, a home range that in the wild would have spanned 100 miles a day, and a language that had no one left to speak it with. So the real question was never why doesn't this animal kill us? The real question is how a predator with the power to end a blue whale chooses, encounter after encounter, decade after decade, not to end you. And what it says about us, that the one time that restraint finally broke, it happened only after we had spent 34 years taking apart everything that made the animal who it was in the first place. The ocean's most powerful hunter has kept its half of a truce neither species ever formally agreed to. The only time that truce has ever failed was the one time we put it in a concrete box.